Jake Morrison had been a firefighter for 7 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. Burning buildings, car wrecks, people trapped in places that seemed impossible to escape from. But nothing prepared him for what happened on that freezing February morning in downtown Portland. Nothing prepared him for the choice he'd have to make or the price he'd pay for making it. It was 4:30 in the morning when the call came through. Structure fire at the old Riverside apartment complex on Sullivan Street. Jake knew that building. Everyone in the department knew it. 6 stories of low-income housing, most of it occupied by people who had nowhere else to go. Homeless folks who'd managed to get into the system, addicts trying to get clean, families barely scraping by. The kind of place that code enforcement had been trying to shut down for years, but never quite managed to. The kind of place that was a disaster waiting to happen. Jake's truck arrived second on scene, right behind engine 12. The building was already half engulfed, flames shooting out of windows on the 3rd and 4th floors, black smoke pouring into the pre-dawn sky. Captain Davis was incident commander, standing outside the perimeter with a tablet, coordinating the response. Jake geared up fast, checking his air tank, his mask, his radio. He could hear the chaos on the comms already. Multiple people trapped, civilians trying to run back inside for their stuff. The usual nightmare of a residential fire. Captain Davis gathered the crew for a quick briefing. His face was grim, lit by the orange glow of the flames. "Listen up. This building is a structural nightmare. Half the fire escapes don't meet code. We've got reports of people on every floor. Priority is floors 2 and 3. That's where we've got confirmed civilian presence. Floor 4 is fully involved. Nobody's surviving up there. Floor 5 and 6, building management says they're vacant, been closed off for renovations for months. We go in, we get who we can, and we get out before this whole thing comes down." Jake nodded along with the rest of the crew. Standard protocol. Save who you can save, don't waste time on lost causes, don't risk firefighters for empty floors. Made perfect sense. They split into teams and pushed into the building. The heat was intense, even on the ground floor. The smoke thick enough that Jake couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, even with his flashlight. He could hear people screaming, crying, calling for help. The sounds that never leave you, no matter how many fires you fight. Jake's team cleared the 2nd floor, pulling out an elderly couple and 3 kids who'd been hiding in a bathtub. Standard procedure: get them to the stairs, get them out, move to the next room. They worked floor by floor, room by room, the building groaning and creaking around them like a living thing in its death throes. By the time they reached the 4th floor, the heat was unbearable. The ceiling was sagging, flames licking through gaps in the walls. Captain Davis's voice crackled over the radio. "All teams, 4th floor is lost. Evacuate to ground level. Repeat, evacuate now." Jake turned to head back down the stairs when he heard it. Faint, almost lost under the roar of the fire and the sound of his own breathing in the mask. But definitely there. Banging, rhythmic, desperate banging, coming from above, from the 5th floor, the floor that was supposed to be empty. Jake froze. His training said, "Follow orders, get out, the building's coming down." But that banging said someone was up there. Someone was alive and trapped and would die if nobody went up. Jake keyed his radio. "Captain, I've got banging sounds from floor 5. Someone's up there." The response was immediate and firm. "Negative, Morrison. Floor 5 is vacant. It's a pipe or debris. Get out now." But Jake heard it again. 3 bangs. Pause, 3 bangs. That wasn't random. That was someone signaling. someone who knew that pattern meant SOS. Jake looked at his partner, Rodriguez. They'd been on dozens of calls together. Rodriguez heard it too. Jake could see the conflict in his eyes through the mask. "Morrison, do you copy? Evacuate immediately." Captain Davis's voice was getting angry now. Jake made a decision that would end his career. "Copy that, Captain. On my way down." Then he switched his radio to a different channel and started climbing. Rodriguez grabbed his arm. "Jake, what are you doing?" "That's a direct order." Jake pulled free. "I heard someone up there. I'm not leaving them." Rodriguez stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once and started climbing too. The fifth floor was worse than anything Jake had experienced. The heat was so intense, it felt like his gear might melt. The floor was unstable, sagging in places, completely gone in others. Jake had to navigate around holes that opened directly down to the flames below. And the smoke was so thick, his flashlight was almost useless, but he could still hear the banging. Louder now, coming from the far end of the hallway. Jake and Rodriguez moved as fast as they dared, testing each step, knowing the floor could give way at any second. They found the door. It was metal, the kind that was supposed to be fire-resistant, but was now glowing red-hot. The banging was coming from inside. Jake tried the handle and jerked his hand back, even through his glove. Locked from the outside. Someone had locked this door from the hallway side. Jake's mind raced. This floor was supposed to be vacant, but someone was in there and someone had locked them in. He didn't have time to figure out why. He just needed to get them out. Jake pulled out his Halligan bar and went to work on the lock. The metal was so hot it was starting to warp. Rodriguez kept watch, checking the floor, the ceiling, calling out structural concerns. The banging inside the room got more frantic. Whoever was in there could probably smell the smoke, feel the heat, knew they were running out of time. Jake's muscles screamed as he pried at the door. Finally, with a shriek of tortured metal, the lock gave way. Jake shoved the door open and smoke poured out. Inside, huddled in the corner farthest from the door, was a kid, maybe 16, 17 years old. Skinny, dressed in clothes that looked like they'd been worn for days. His eyes were wild with terror, his hands bloody from banging on the door. The kid tried to talk, but just coughed, choking on smoke. Jake didn't waste time with questions. He grabbed the kid, hoisted him up, and started back toward the stairs. That's when the floor gave way. Not all at once, but in sections. Jake heard the crack, felt the shift, and then Rodriguez was falling, just dropped straight through into the inferno below. Jake lunged, caught Rodriguez's hand, his shoulder screaming with the sudden weight. The kid was clinging to Jake's back, dead weight, barely conscious from smoke inhalation. Jake was hanging half through the hole in the floor, holding Rodriguez with one hand, the kid on his back, the floor continuing to crack and splinter around them. "Let me go," Rodriguez shouted. "You can't pull us both." But Jake wasn't letting go. He hooked his leg around a support beam, used it as leverage, and with strength he didn't know he had, hauled Rodriguez back up through the hole. They scrambled away from the collapsing section, the kid barely moving now. Jake threw him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and ran. Behind them, the fifth floor was disintegrating. Ahead, the stairwell. They hit those stairs at full speed and didn't stop until they burst out the ground floor exit into the cold morning air. Paramedics rushed forward, taking the kid from Jake's arms. Jake ripped off his mask, gulping air, his lungs burning. Rodriguez collapsed next to him, both of them coughing, covered in soot and sweat. Captain Davis stormed over, his face red with fury. "What the hell were you thinking? I gave you a direct order to evacuate." Jake was still trying to catch his breath. "There was someone up there, Captain. A kid. He'd have died." Captain Davis pointed at the building, which was now fully engulfed, parts of it starting to collapse. "You risked 2 firefighters for a floor we were told was empty. You disobeyed a direct order in the middle of an active scene. You could have gotten Rodriguez killed. For what? For someone who wasn't even supposed to be there." Jake struggled to his feet. But he was there. And now he's alive. Captain Davis's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Turn in your gear. You're suspended pending investigation, both of you." The ride back to the station was silent. Jake sat in the truck, his mind spinning. He'd saved a kid's life. Why did that feel like he'd done something wrong? At the station, he had to surrender his gear, his badge, his radio. The other firefighters avoided eye contact. Word spread fast. Jake Morrison had ignored a direct command, gone rogue, nearly got himself and Rodriguez killed. He was done. Rodriguez got suspended too, but everyone knew he'd just been following Jake's lead. Jake was the one who'd really screwed up. Jake went home to his apartment, took a shower that turned the water black with soot, and sat on his couch, staring at nothing. His phone started buzzing. Texts from other firefighters, most of them some variation of, "What were you thinking?" or "That was reckless, man." A few said they understood but couldn't say so publicly. Nobody wanted to be associated with a firefighter who disobeyed orders. That was the fastest way to get yourself blacklisted from every department in the state. 3 days later, Jake was called in for his disciplinary hearing. The room was full of people. The fire chief, union representatives, department lawyers, even a representative from the city. They laid it out for him in stark terms. He'd violated protocol, ignored direct orders, endangered fellow firefighters, and created massive liability for the department. The fact that he'd saved someone didn't matter. Actually, it made things worse, because the someone he'd saved was a problem. The kid's name was Tyler Chen, 17 years old, and he'd been squatting in that locked room on the 5th floor. The building owner had known about squatters, had been trying to evict them for months, had finally locked the floors to keep them out. Tyler had broken in anyway, looking for a warm place to sleep. The building owner was threatening to sue the fire department for property damage, claiming Jake's actions had made the fire worse, had caused more destruction than necessary. It was insane, but it was also legally complicated. The fire chief's face was grave. "Jake, I've known you for 7 years. You're a good firefighter. But what you did violated every rule we have for a reason. Those rules keep people alive. Keep our people alive. I can't overlook this." Jake kept his voice steady. "Chief, there was a kid up there. I heard him. I couldn't just leave." The chief nodded slowly. "I understand. But you still had a choice. Follow orders or go rogue. You chose wrong." Jake was terminated effective immediately. Not suspended, not on probation. Fired. 7 years of service. Dozens of lives saved. Commendations on his record. None of it mattered. He'd broken the chain of command, and that was unforgivable. Jake walked out of that building knowing he'd never fight another fire. His career was over at 31 years old. And for what? For saving a homeless kid nobody cared about. The media got hold of the story within days. Firefighter fired for saving life made great headlines, but the department had their own narrative. Reckless firefighter, endangered crew, violated safety protocols, put entire operation at risk. They made Jake sound like a cowboy, someone who thought he was above the rules. The comments online were split. Some people called him a hero. Others called him irresponsible. Most just moved on to the next story. Jake spent weeks in a fog. He applied to other fire departments, but the termination followed him everywhere. Nobody wanted to hire someone with that kind of record. He took a job doing private security, boring work that paid less and meant nothing. He'd gone from saving lives to checking IDs at a warehouse. The fall from grace was complete. His girlfriend left him, saying she couldn't handle the drama. His friends from the department stopped calling. He was alone, broke, and questioning every decision he'd made. 2 months after the fire, Jake was working a night shift at the warehouse when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Is this Jake Morrison?" The voice was young, uncertain. "Yeah, who's this?" There was a pause. "It's Tyler." Tyler Chen? The kid from the fire. Jake sat up straight. "Tyler, how did you get my number?" Another pause. "I looked you up. I had to find you. I had to tell you something." Tyler's voice was shaking. "I heard what happened to you, that you got fired, that you lost everything because you saved me. I've been living with that for 2 months, and I can't anymore. I need you to know something. That night, the night of the fire, I wasn't just squatting. I'd gone up there to die." Jake's blood went cold. "What?" Tyler took a shaky breath. "I'd been on the streets for 8 months. Got kicked out when I came out to my parents. Been bouncing around, sleeping wherever I could. That night was the worst night of my life. I was done. I decided I was done." Tyler continued, his words tumbling out. "I broke into that room and I don't know what I was going to do, but then the fire started. And I realized I didn't actually want to die. I was just so tired and scared and alone. I started banging on that door, screaming, and nobody came. I thought that was it. I decided not to die, and I was going to die anyway. Then you came. You broke down that door, and you carried me out, and you saved my life when I'd been too stupid to save it myself." Jake couldn't speak. Tyler wasn't finished. "After the hospital, social services placed me with a foster family. Good people. They're helping me get my GED, get into therapy. I'm applying to community college. I want to be a social worker, help kids like me. And it's all because you didn't leave me there. You gave me a second chance I didn't even know I wanted, and you lost everything for it. That's not right, that's not fair." Jake found his voice. "Tyler, you don't owe me anything. I'm glad you're okay. That's all that matters." But Tyler wasn't done. "I went to the news. I told them everything. About being suicidal, about you saving me, about what it actually meant. I told them you're not reckless. You're a hero who saw someone who needed help and didn't care about the rules. I'm giving interviews to anyone who'll listen. I'm going to fix this." The story exploded all over again, but this time, the narrative was different. Firefighter saved suicidal teen, lost job for doing what's right. Tyler's interviews were raw and honest. He talked about being homeless, about that night, about Jake's courage. The public reaction shifted dramatically. Suddenly, people weren't debating protocol. They were asking how a city could fire someone for saving a kid's life. The pressure on the fire department became immense. Jake's phone started ringing off the hook. News outlets wanting interviews. Lawyers offering to take his case for free. Other firefighters reaching out, saying they'd been afraid to speak up before, but they supported him. Even Rodriguez called, apologizing for not standing with him sooner. The union started making noise about wrongful termination. Politicians got involved, sensing an opportunity. Within a week, Jake went from forgotten disgrace to the center of a citywide conversation about what heroism really means. The fire chief called Jake personally. "Morrison, we need to talk. Can you come to the station?" Jake wasn't sure what to expect, but he went. The chief met him in his office, and for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "Jake, the mayor's been breathing down my neck. The city council wants your reinstatement. The union's threatening legal action. And honestly, after hearing that kid's story, I've been doing some thinking." Jake waited. The chief continued. "What you did was still against protocol. I stand by that. But protocols are designed to save lives, and that's what you did. Sometimes the rules and the right thing aren't the same thing." The chief slid a folder across his desk. "This is an offer. Full reinstatement with back pay, your record cleared, and a new position. We're creating a specialized rescue unit for situations that fall outside normal protocol. High-risk scenarios, judgment call situations. You'd head it up, train a team, develop new protocols that balance safety with reality. It's not a punishment, and it's not a reward. It's recognition that maybe the rulebook doesn't cover everything." Jake stared at the folder. "You're serious?" The chief nodded. "I am. But Jake, this only works if you understand something. You can't go rogue again. This new unit, it gives you more discretion, but you still operate within a command structure. You still answer to someone. Can you do that?" Jake thought about Tyler, about that night, about the choice he'd made. "Yeah, Chief, I can do that. But if I hear someone banging on a door, I'm going through it, protocol or not." The chief smiled for the first time. "That's exactly why I want you leading this unit." "Welcome back, Morrison." Jake's reinstatement made headlines. His first day back at the station, the crew gave him a standing ovation. Rodriguez hugged him, both of them emotional. Even the guys who'd avoided him before were suddenly friendly again. Jake didn't hold it against them. He understood fear, understood how the system made people choose safety over standing up. He'd chosen differently, and somehow, against all odds, it had worked out. Tyler came to the station to meet the crew. He looked different than that terrified kid Jake had carried out of the fire. Healthier, more confident, hopeful. He shook hands with everyone, thanking them for their service. When he got to Jake, he didn't shake his hand. He hugged him. "You gave me my life back. I'm never going to waste it." Jake hugged him back. "Make it count, kid. That's all I ask." The new rescue unit became operational 6 months later. Jake trained a team of 8 firefighters, all volunteers who wanted to be part of something that prioritized saving lives over covering liability. They developed new protocols, new techniques, new ways of assessing risk that factored in human judgment alongside standard procedures. Other departments started watching, some critical, others curious. Jake didn't care. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. He was just trying to do the job right. 1 year after that fire, Jake received an award from the National Firefighters Association, the Citation for Valor, given to firefighters who risked their lives beyond the call of duty. The ceremony was in Chicago. Hundreds of firefighters from across the country in attendance. When they called Jake's name and told his story, the entire room stood and applauded. These were his people. They understood what he'd done and why it mattered. In his acceptance speech, Jake kept it simple. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a firefighter who heard someone calling for help and decided that was more important than following orders." Every single person in this room has faced moments where the right choice and the safe choice weren't the same thing. I got lucky. My story had a happy ending. But there are firefighters out there right now who are being punished for caring too much, for acting when they should have waited, for putting lives before policies. We need to do better. We need systems that support the people who risk everything to save others. That's the real work. The speech went viral. Fire departments across the country started reviewing their protocols, creating more flexibility for judgment calls, protecting firefighters who made difficult decisions in impossible situations. Jake's case became a teaching tool in training academies, not as an example of what to do or what not to do, but as a conversation starter about when rules serve us and when they fail us. Tyler graduated high school with honors and got accepted to Portland State University on a full scholarship. He was studying social work, exactly like he'd said he would. He and Jake stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every few months. Tyler was thriving, surrounded by people who supported him, building the life he'd almost given up on. Every time Jake saw him, he was reminded why that night had been worth it, why losing everything had been worth it. Jake's rescue unit responded to a call on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A car had gone off a bridge into the river. Driver trapped inside, car sinking fast. Standard protocol said, wait for the dive team. Don't risk firefighters in swift water without proper support. But Jake looked at that sinking car, at the person inside whose face was pressed against the window, terror in their eyes, and he made a call. We're going in. His team didn't hesitate. They'd trained for this. They trusted him. They went in, pulled the driver out with seconds to spare, got everyone back to shore safely. Later, the fire chief called again. Jake thought he might be in trouble again, might have pushed too far. But the chief just said, "Good work today, Morrison." That's exactly what this unit is for. Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Complete certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. 5 years after that February fire, Jake was promoted to battalion chief, overseeing multiple rescue units across the city. The program he'd started had expanded, become a model for departments nationwide. He'd written training manuals, given lectures, changed how firefighters thought about risk and reward. But he never forgot where it started, with a kid banging on a door and a choice to ignore orders and do what was right. Tyler finished college and got a job with the same social services agency that had helped him. He worked with homeless youth, LGBTQ kids who'd been kicked out, anyone who needed someone to believe in them. He was good at it, really good, because he'd been there. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, disposable, forgotten. And he made sure nobody on his caseload ever felt that way. On the anniversary of the fire every year, Jake and Tyler met at the same coffee shop. They didn't talk about that night much anymore. They talked about life, about work, about the future. But they both knew. They both carried that night with them. The moment when everything changed. When one person's choice to break the rules saved another person's entire existence. When doing the right thing cost everything, and somehow still ended up being worth it. Jake never regretted climbing those stairs. Not during the suspension, not during the termination, not even in the darkest moments when he thought his career was over forever. Because he'd heard someone calling for help and he'd answered. That's what firefighters do. That's what humans do. And no protocol, no policy, no threat of consequences would ever be enough to make him turn away from someone who needed saving. That was the lesson. That was what he'd learned and what he'd taught. Sometimes you have to break the rules to live by a higher one. Sometimes the only choice is courage, even when it costs everything. If Jake's story hit you differently, if it made you think about what real courage looks like, I need you to do something right now. Smash that subscribe button, because next week I'm sharing the story of the teacher who was banned from her school for saving a student from something unthinkable. The system tried to bury her. What happened next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have climbed those stairs? Would you risk your entire career to save someone the world said wasn't worth saving? Hit that like button and let's keep telling stories about people who choose humanity over rules. See you next week.